Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Paulo Pisano. He is the EVP and CHRO at Booking Holdings. They're a 24,000 person company, and you might recognize some of their brands: Kayak, OpenTable, Priceline, Booking.com, and Agoda. I can tell you that I use OpenTable probably multiple times a week to book restaurant reservations. So probably everyone's familiar with that brand. Paulo, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about um, two big themes, which are culture and AI. And
Okay.
so I thought we would spend a first little bit of time talking about culture, then talking about AI, and then it would be really interesting to get your perspectives on how AI is impacting culture. So
hmm
starting off just from the culture perspective, why don't you first give us a little bit of background information about you, about the company, in case people are just not familiar with the brands.
Sure. Let me start with the company. So, Booking Holdings has been around for a bit over a couple of decades. I think 25 years in our kind of Booking.com brand, maybe a bit longer in Priceline. We grew through acquisitions, like many companies in this space. We have grown keeping a pretty independent or autonomous portfolio of companies. So we have a small team at the center at Booking Holdings, and then we have some amazing teams in each of our brands, and they've grown, after we've brought companies into the group organically and developed, some of their own culture, their own ways of doing things. But over the years, we've built more and more connective tissue, more collaboration across the group. We can talk about that as well. We are
Yeah.
present in over 220 countries and territories, I think.
Okay, so you're
So it's
basically
very
everywhere,
global.
everywhere in the world.
Yeah, pretty much everywhere. We try to be everywhere. This is all about, making it easier for people to experience the world. So we want to be everywhere we can. It is a two-sided marketplace, right? So we're effectively helping connect travelers and bookers and users with, hotels and car rental companies and restaurants and experiences and whatnot. And I've been at the company for just a bit over 5 years. So I joined at the very
Wow.
beginning of the pandemic. That might be another another story. And I've been in the HR space for a long time. HR, change management, organizational development. It's very transferable across industries. So I've done a number of very different industries, and it's been a blast to be in
Yeah.
in this space. Travel is such an interesting space to be in.
Yeah, and it's getting involved during the pandemic, I think, is pretty interesting. So I run a CHRO group called Future of Work Leaders. We have
Mhm.
around 35 CHROs in there, and I'm constantly asking them about pivotal moments, and even just on the
Mhm.
podcast and other leaders that I work with. And
Right.
everybody seems to say and point to the pandemic as one of the most pivotal moments in work, I'd say, over the past several decades. Because it
hmm
really challenged assumptions about work. It really forced us to work differently. But
hmm
in a new book that I have coming out next year, I actually argue that I think the pandemic made a lot of organizations lose their way. I think they got very confused, they got very lost. They were struggling so much to keep people in their doors that they lost sight of culture. They lost sight of the things that matter. They were doing anything and everything to keep people there. And I think it's one of the reasons why now, post pandemic, you see so many organizations trying to fight back against some of these things, getting employees back into the office. They're trying to reduce the number of perks. They're using AI now to save costs. Because
hmm
during the pandemic, nobody knew how long it was going to last, what the impact
Yeah.
was going to be. People were, rationally so, they were freaking out. Would
Yes.
you agree with that assessment? I mean, did you see that as well from your peers and the organization that you were a part of? That companies just they lost sight of what the core of employee experience is. They just kind of went everywhere.
Yeah. I would recognize that in general. I don't think it happened to every organization.
Yes.
It's interesting. Was doing a podcast a few months ago, and as we were kind of free flowing around the end of the podcast, I think one thing that came up, a reflection I had, is for booking in particular. One of the things that the pandemic invited us to be was more of who we are rather than the opposite. So I
Mm,
think the way we found our center was to actually to reconnect with our values and with what made us who we were and what
back to
made us
basics.
successful. Exactly. And, you know, as a leadership team, for example, is back to basics. Let's now frequent communication, transparent,
Yep.
vulnerable, present for people. If I look at what we didn't do a lot of extra things. We didn't build a lot of extra perks. And we did have a pretty hard time from a talent standpoint, I'd say towards the end of the pandemic back in 2022 or so, because back then, if you look at the market, particularly in Europe and the US, you had a mix of the big technology companies, the Googles and the Amazons and the Metas of the world, doing a lot of very aggressive hiring.
Yep.
You had also a lot of capital available for the so-called pre-IPO market, so a lot of scale-ups, and you had a travel industry that was not yet recovered, and it was not yet clear when that was going to come back. So it was very hard to fight for talent in that environment. And yet we didn't make fundamental shifts on how we did things and who we were, because I think rightly or wrongly we had a belief that, you know, what we had was consistent. um, so the advantage of that, I guess, is we didn't have, no, fast forward to today, we didn't have to track back and make massive changes on anything these days. But I am, like you, networked with many of my peers, and I think this affected different organizations
Yeah.
differently. And you know, it was a very big challenge. So I did see also a number of organizations trying to figure out how to find their way.
Uh,
Um, so yeah, I
how
recognize that.
how do you define culture? A lot of organizations always talk about culture and how important it is, and mission and purpose. Like
Mhm.
every company typically says the same things as far as how important it is, which I think we all understand. But I wanted to really just kind of break down culture specifically inside of your company. Um, Starting off with high level, what does it mean? How do you explain and define what culture is?
Look, the way I look at culture, first and foremost, is how you get things done, not how you do things here. Um, I think it's also uh, what people do so that they feel they can be accepted and belong in a place. Ultimately, it's about that, right? The culture is the behaviors and the actions people have on the basis of what they think is desired or acceptable in an organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's culture at its simplest. Um, and I usually say this is not me the only one saying it, but the thing about culture is it's all around us. You have it, you like it or not. The question mark is how intentional you're going to be in shaping it. Um, and and that is very interesting, just how many organizations are not incredibly intentional about how they shape their culture. And the other thing I've noticed over the years is that even when organizations and teams want to be intentional about it, they don't always have the tools or the knowledge on how to do that, right? Because there are levers that are more effective than others. But this is how we think about culture. Is just it's the most basic. It's how people get things done. Um, and then it has to be aligned to your purpose or your strategy, right? The culture for the sake of a culture doesn't mean much. The big question is your culture helping you or hindering you in delivering on the promise that your organization is?
Do you think you mentioned two words there, or maybe one of them, but the second one usually comes up a lot with culture. Do you think you can have too much belonging, too much inclusivity when it comes to corporate culture? And I can unpack kind of what I mean there if you want me to dive a little bit deeper on that.
Please do. Yeah. What do you mean by too much on the belonging and inclusivity?
So I think when we break down the concept of like inclusion and belonging, I think there are different ways to look at it. So on the one hand, you want people who are working at the company to be themselves, right? I mean, in a professional setting, obviously. But culture is not about being something for everybody. Culture
Hmm.
is about having people work at your company who align with your values, with
Yeah.
your mission, with your purpose. And I feel, and I've seen many times, especially over the past 5 years, companies who deliver a message of we want to be a place where anybody can show up, everybody come through our doors. And I don't think that's the right approach, right? I mean, if you look at a company, I don't know, SpaceX, or
Hmm.
you look, I mean, SpaceX or any, or Tesla, for example, they don't want anybody to work there. A company like that, they want people there who are going to work 70 to 80 hours a week. They want people there who are willing to sleep in the office, people who are willing to work on some of the
Hmm.
world's toughest and most complicated challenges and problems,
Right.
people who have a lot of grit and resilience, people who are not going to be asking, "Oh, how many hours do I need to work? What is my work-life balance going to be?" That's not the kind of company they are. Uh, Look at Chase, Jamie Dimon. They don't
Hmm.
want a company where employees are asking about flexible work or working remotely. They want people who are in the office. So when I say too much inclusion, it's the idea of trying to be everything to everyone instead of being very specific about the company that you want to build,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
values that you have, and really only attracting those people. Because that, to me, is what culture is. That's what values are. It's about building a business and having a team where people are aligned, like they're a part of that. But if you're just hiring anybody who wants a job, that to me doesn't seem like the right approach for a lot of organizations. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
direction that I'm going with when I say too much belonging,
Hmm.
too much inclusion, where you're trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah. So first, I agree with you, right? I've seen I've seen that, and there is such a thing as too much, almost of anything, right?
Yep.
When you think about it, um, there's many layers. I think, Jacob, to what you're saying. I think first, um, this what you describe makes the case for me for having clarity and intentionality about the culture you
Yeah.
have. Intentionality is one part of it, but the other part of it is your ability to be clear on what the culture is. The clearer you are, the clearer it is not just for the people who are in the organization, but for the ones who are considering the organization, so they can make a decision if that's the place they want to work in or not. That's one part of it. The clearer you are with it, also in terms of your values, your mindsets, the behaviors that are important, the easier it is for you to embed those in your recruiting, for example, in your
Hmm.
employee value proposition, in your employer brand, in all those things. So I'm absolutely for clarity on that.
Yeah. And
And I
being
agree that
honest, right? I mean,
absolutely.
like
But
there's a
before being honest is being clear, because
yes.
sometimes people are not clear. And for you to be honest, you have to know what you think or what you
Yeah.
stand for.
And I think there's been a big lack of clarity, right? I mean, it's a difference between,
Yes.
like I said, SpaceX or Salesforce, right? If you go work at Salesforce, you'll still be paid well. You'll probably work closer to 40 hours a week. It's a company that's more focused on well-being and work-life balance. And, you're not going to be sending anybody to space, but, you'll work on some fun projects here and there. But that's a different culture. And I feel like we need organizations and leaders to be much more clear and honest about the company that they're trying to build and the teams that they want to have. And, and even during like, for example, when you interview candidates, how do you make sure that there's alignment? Like, do you ask, right? You can't ask an employee or a candidate, hey, are you going to complain if you have to work too many hours? Are you going to, be upset if we, so how do you make sure that when you're talking to people, that you're able to kind of weed out, because sometimes they might be qualified, like they can do the job well,
Hmm.
but you can talk to them and you're like, I don't think that's going to be a good fit. It's same thing like when you go to a party and you're meeting friends and you might look at somebody and say, well, they're nice, but I know we're just, we're different. We're not going to have a friendship
Yeah.
or a relationship there. How do you do that when you're talking to people or using AI for that? Maybe, I don't know.
First and foremost, way before AI, is when you have clarity on what are the traits, the attributes, the attitudes, the ways of working that make people successful in your culture. You incorporate that in the interview process, right? So you
Mm.
can ask questions that are very pointed, and you can look for experiences where people will give you examples of when they had to burn the midnight oil, or when they had to collaborate across different businesses, and how did they go about influencing people in areas that they're not directly in charge. For example, if you have a highly matrixed environment, or if you
You,
have a
you
very
ask that kind of
global,
stuff.
we ask that kind of stuff. We train interviewers and managers in that kind of stuff, so we have that as an element of what we do in the interviews. And the other bit, Jacob, we do as well is I know I always motivate candidates to do that, which is to ask questions as well, to do their due diligence on the organization. You know, companies are on average better than candidates in doing
Hmm.
the due diligence through the interview process, reference checks, and whatnot.
Yeah.
Sometimes candidates are not as good at doing their own due diligence.
Yep.
So we say, yeah, you can do that through former colleagues. You can do that on some of the online platforms. You can do that by watching interviews and podcasts of executives. You can ask for certain interviews in the process, right? Maybe you are going through an interview process, you've talked to six, seven people, let's say you're an executive, and you keep hearing a name of a person that seems to be important. Maybe you'll say, hey, I would like to talk to that person and to get
Yep.
that perspective. So there are ways to do that. The one distinction I would make though on your point on being too inclusive is there's also a fine line that I would put on between there's a culture and a way of working that is what you're looking for at the organization. But for me, the notion of inclusivity is that you can be yourself when you come to that organization. You can be authentic so that you don't have to be spending energy
Hmm.
to hide a part of you or to not be that person because you're not going to work out or be accepted there.
Yeah.
And I think those things are not necessarily in opposition with one
Yes. Yeah,
another.
I agree. And it's like once you're hired, that's kind of the second step there.
Yeah.
Um, but even there, because a lot of people say, oh, we want employees to be their authentic selves, we want them to come and be themselves. But is that also the best approach? Because it is a place of business, it is a
Yeah.
corporation, they
Mhm.
are being paid, they do have responsibilities and accountabilities. So, yeah, I mean, you do act and behave differently in a corporate setting as you would in your personal life. Ideally, you will dress
Mhm.
differently, you'll behave
Yeah.
differently. So, is it the idea of being your authentic self? Like, how do you
Mm.
understand what I'm saying? Like, it's not,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like your authentic self, but in a business context. Because I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes when we tell people, be your authentic
Yeah.
self, be,
Yeah.
show up how you want,
Yeah.
that's also not, to me, the right approach, right? I mean, we do
Yeah.
need to let people know, hey, you know what? We want you to feel comfortable here, but this is a business, right? I mean,
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because it's come up in some conversations recently. I think someone was alluding to the phrase some people use, which is bring your whole self to
yeah,
work,
yeah,
not just the
exactly.
authentic self. And we're like, well, do you want a person to bring their whole self or their whole professional self to work, right?
Yes.
And I think it's somewhere in between. Again, it's the nuance of it. Of course, an organization, a for-profit organization, is a place for work. You're a team, right? You're trying to achieve things. You're there getting paid to get something done. And of course, I know we make the effort, and I know every good organization will do the same to ensure that we have a mission and goals that are ambitious and that are highly engaging for people. Right? We want people to have that real emotional connection with what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think we're luck might not be the right word, but we're lucky that we are in this intersection between travel and technology, which is extremely exciting. So that makes it easier for us also to attract and to engage talent. But there is, again, it's for me, it's kind of a fine line. I want people to be themselves, to feel that they don't have to spend energy trying to put on a facade or kind of some kind of, but on the other hand, it is a place of work. It is a
Yeah.
place where whatever you do has an impact on people around you. And we're a team. We're trying to get amazing things done.
I like
So
that
it
whole
is now not always easy. I see some companies struggling with that
yeah, and I
space.
like the idea you mentioned, like your whole professional self. Um, and I think maybe that's a better way to phrase it because again, the way that you would act in your personal life versus the way that you would act in a company is different, right? If you're part of a team, you're going to be expected sometimes to solve your own problem. You might have
Mhm.
a difficult day. You need to be professional. You need to be respectful. You have to show up on time. You have to be accountable. You have to look presentable. Like these might not be things that everybody does in their personal life, and that might not be something that they're used to, but you need to act in a way where you feel comfortable and you don't need to hide, but also
Yeah.
do it in the context of the rules and guidelines and the environment that which you're in. And it's part of like being an adult and being professional. Like you're not going to go to a funeral and start cracking jokes, right?
Look, absolutely right. Once more, you want that, what you're describing, but you also want people to feel that if they do have a personal problem, they're going through a hard patch, whatever, that
Yeah, they
that
can
is a
speak
safe
up.
space where they can speak up, connect with people. The analog I use for that is it's a bit different in context, but it's the same in spirit. Is when we start meetings in many parts of the organization, we do a check-in, right? I'm sure you've done that. And
Yeah.
what's the check-in? The check-in is an opportunity to go around the room and for people to say if they need the group to know something that's useful for that meeting, you put it on the table so people are aware. And I might say, look, um, I have a kind of a pipe leak at home. There's some people working on there. I might need to be checking my phone to see if everything's going okay. So when I'm on the phone, just know that's, or someone might say uh, something horrible has happened and I'm not
Yeah,
fully
tragedy
here,
of
but
some
I'll try
kind.
to be. What's the equivalent of that, right? But the important part of that, I think, is that you're doing that in service of the team around you.
Yeah.
And that's the bit for me that is this bit around bringing your professional self is a reminder that when you are at work, you're not there for you only. You are there for everybody else. You're there in service of your colleagues and the organization. And therefore, that should, as a first step, help you kind of balance and make good decisions around what do you bring to the table and when. We had this conversation, for example, in the infamous, I guess, return to work you were mentioning, right? How many
Yeah.
days a week remote or whatever. And when we're having that conversation, I noticed, and this is not just at Booking, but across many organizations, the what you heard from a lot of employees was, oh, I don't have to be at the office to be productive. You have to trust me and I can do better at home. And while that might be true, the value of an office space goes up when you have more people there. If there's 5 people there, it's not incredibly, kind of helpful for those
Yeah.
5 people. When you have 1,000 or 5,000, it makes a difference.
Yep.
So you're coming to the office not just for you. You're coming to create an environment that is more valuable for everyone else. And I think that links with what you're describing, right? It's bringing yourself to be in service of
Yeah.
others as well.
Yeah. I also think companies are a little too nice in that regard. I mean, who cares if your employees are saying, why should I come to the office? Like, honestly, what it's your like like this is what
Mhm.
kind of blows my mind, and you can tell me if I'm totally off base here.
Mhm.
But a company, it's the relationship is mutually exchanged value, and so if I
Mhm.
have a company and I have a small team of people, but if I'm paying
Mhm.
employees a salary, I'm paying for their benefits, I'm paying a retirement, I'm paying for an office, I'm paying for the equipment that you use, I have a right to say we have an office, you should work in an office. Similarly,
Mhm.
you as an employee have a right to say, no, I don't want to do that. I quit, which is fine. And that's the
Mhm.
message that the CEO of Chase gave, right? Jamie Dimon. He
Mhm.
said, we want you back in the office. It's not going to be a conversation. It's not a debate. We're not going to go back and forth on this. Come to the office. If you don't want to come to the office, you're more than welcome to quit and go work
Mhm.
for another company. We're not going to be mad at you. And I think a lot of organizations have gotten too complacent, too nice, too accommodating, too like, well, let's explain to you why it's important to come into the office. Here's some research why you should come into the office. It's like, no, we don't owe that to you, right?
Hmm.
We are paying you. So come to the office, and if you don't like it, go work somewhere else. Is that too mean? Like, is that too heartless? Or, I mean, feel free to be honest with me. Because I'm not saying you shouldn't
Yeah.
listen
Mhm. Yeah.
to what your employees want, but you don't have to
Yeah.
do everything that your employees want, right? You got to
Well,
do what makes sense for the business.
I agree with your last sentence, definitely, right? So I think listening to what your employees want is extremely valuable and extremely important. That does not mean you have to do everything they want. I completely agree with that. On the broader topic of how consultative you want to be, so to speak, I think it depends. It depends on what we were talking about before. First is what's your culture like? Different organizations will have different culture. So you would expect that in the process of making certain decisions, you're going to be coherent with your culture, right?
Yeah.
Banks are known, and I've spent a decade in banks. They tend to be much more hierarchical, much more top down, more political environments. And when you have a kind of a reduction in force at the bank, it's not uncommon to get people to put their stuff in a box and be escorted to the
Yeah.
to the exit.
I saw that
That would
firsthand when I
be,
worked at Morgan Stanley years ago, and the vice
yeah.
president is the one who hired me. And then one day I literally see him being escorted out of the office
Mhm.
holding a box of stuff.
There you
And I was
go.
like,
And
shocked.
and you don't see a lot of people complaining about that in banks. I mean, they may not like it, but it's not, you don't have a revolt because that's the expected
Yeah.
way of doing things there. Now, that same way of exiting people would be unthinkable in a number of other organizations that I know,
Yeah.
including us, right? We would never do that. It's just not the way we do things. But that is not out of the blue or not out of something being right or wrong. That's out of an alignment with the culture and the ways of doing things. And I think that the risk of you doing things completely top down is you build a transactional culture, right? So if you look again, banks as an example, more often than not, you have a pretty transactional culture. You can have very smart people, they're making great money, and they'll get a bit more money and go elsewhere. Of course, I'm generalizing or exaggerating, but it is more transactional. And then you have other cultures where things might be done in a kind of more kind of collaborative way, and you will build a lot of goodwill. The flip side of it is when you want to make change, it's harder to change because it takes longer. You see that in cultures, in national cultures as well, right? The
Yeah.
Netherlands, as an example, is a much more of a consensus-driven culture. So a lot of people will talk and will decide it's, and that
Let's
means on
agree. Yeah.
average,
Yeah.
it's slower to get to the result. But the advantage is once you do get to the result, you have full alignment with
More buy-in.
everyone,
Yeah.
and it's kind of you go slower to go faster, right? You went slower, but once the decision is made, you can go at speed because you don't have to be dealing with detractors and people that disagree but don't really commit. On in other cultures like the US, for example, you just make the decision and move. You deal with the issues later. So it's about trade-offs for me, and it's about consistency with the culture.
Yeah. And I guess that's where your earlier point around clarity and being honest about it makes sense, because if you tell employees, hey, we want you in the office when you hire them,
Mhm.
they're not going to have different expectations. But if you tell employees, hey, we're going to be a
Mhm.
remote first company, and then they work there for a year, and you say, oh, by the way, we want you back in the office, then they're going to be like, what the hell? Like, you told me when I started working here this is going to be one way, and then you kind of shifted gears. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I think that clarity makes a lot of sense, and you got to be clear and honest. And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of companies have, is they are not sure. They might be sure about their culture today, but
Mhm.
they don't do a good enough job of using foresight to think about the kind of company they want to become in the future. And
Mhm.
so they tell employees, here's what we're like today, but there's never talk around, here's what we're going to be like in the future. And if you want to be part of this company for 2, 5, 6, 8 years, this is the direction that we're going in. And maybe that
Yeah.
should be a part of the process when employees are getting hired
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
recruited, is to say, hey, this is the company you're joining now, but this is where we're going. And this should excite you, right? There's no talk of that. It's always about the present.
Yes, there's no, I think there's often not enough awareness of the trade-offs of growing and evolving, right? So
Yeah.
you see that from a maturity standpoint. Um, Booking has examples, within our group because we're still a relatively young organization. And I remember someone once described the culture of one of our companies as it was an adolescent in an adult's body, right? So the company was already big and meaningful, and yet people inside the organization felt they were part of a scale up or startup. And that
Yeah.
was no longer true. So there, and the reason sometimes companies have issues with that, in my experience, is that they haven't kind of literally updated the software, right? So
Yep.
they are at a different environment and they haven't evolved to be able to deal with that. That is not often an easy process, right? Because it typically means dropping things that are part of your identity of who you think you are in order to incorporate things that are foreign, that are a bit difficult, so when you have to build stronger governance because you're more complex as an organization, or checks and balances, or decision rights, and people were used to doing things very quickly and now they have to deal with it. If you're not great at first telling the story, explaining why do you need to do that, in service of what are we asking you to do this differently, that's a first point of failure I see, right?
Yeah.
Companies try to change things but not explain why.
Hmm.
And then it's the famous, to your point, of not being overly lenient. Once I explain the why, I'm not expecting you have to agree with it. I expect you have to understand it. Now, you may agree or disagree, and you can make your decision. Maybe I don't want to I want to work back in a startup and I want to go to a different company, and that's fine. Actually, we lost some people back in 21, 22, exactly on that space, because we're
Oh.
saying, look, we're global, we're complex, we have multiple verticals, and some people said, I want to go back to the beginning. I want to go back to booking from 10 years ago when there was, like, 300 people. And that's fine. I can't fault them for that. You will
Yeah.
need
Not us
sometimes,
anymore.
yeah, you'll need different people as well for different parts of the journey.
Yeah. All right. One or two more questions on culture,
Mm.
and then switching to AI. So this question is, it's a difficult question, and it's a big challenge for CHROs that I hear a lot. So as we're recording this, there have been a lot of difficult political events that happened. Whether you look at the murder of Charlie Kirk, whether you look at protests that are happening, there's always difficult conversations to have inside of an organization. And I've seen companies take different stances, whether it's political, whether it's vaccine, no vaccine. We like Trump, we
Mhm.
hate Trump. We like Charlie Kirk, we don't like Charlie. There's like a lot of difficult conversations that exist in the world.
Mhm.
And companies have taken different approaches on this. There are some companies who say, we're going to ban this type of conversation at work. Don't talk politics, don't talk religion, that has no place here. And there are other companies that are saying, well, you can talk about, whatever you want here. You have a big company of 24,000 employees.
Mhm.
Regardless of what the issue is, how do you deal with polarizing topics or issues, or if employees don't like something that you're doing? How do you encourage your employees to just have a civilized conversation? Because that to me feels like a little bit of a lost art in today's world. Like everyone's just trying to, go after
Mhm.
each other. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I see the challenge you describe all around us, right? Not just in the corporate world, but across all
Yeah.
different sorts of organizations and communities and families and you name it. For us, first, we have an incredibly diverse workforce, right? I think we have over 150 nationalities. I think we're in different
Wow.
spots, so you can easily get into some pretty difficult kind of
Yeah.
spaces. We do have a code of conduct that's very well communicated across the organization, and we have guidelines on communication, what people are expected to use or internal communication channels for. I'd say it's not, always perfect, and there are some gray areas, but I think it has so far being largely successful in having people keep focused on either work related or personal development related or whatever type of content and topics in our kind of in our communication channels, or at least remain respectful and civilized when raising a topic. Sometimes might be a question or something along those lines. Now, granted, even something I might consider a respectful question might be viewed by somebody else as not run, right? So that's
Yeah.
where also feedback from management, nudges, or channels where people can raise concerns anonymously or otherwise, so that we can go and investigate and see if someone has kind of broken kind of the approach. That's something we look at and we try to do. There's some natural self-regulation as well. It helps having an assertive culture that
Yep.
people feel safe, that they can nudge each other and have conversations. That has helped us too. And as an organization, I think we've been very clear that we are not political. We are, or we have a very clear mission, a very clear job, a very clear competency, which is to help make everyone experience the world, right? So we have our mission, and when everyone make it easier for everyone to experience the world, anything related to that space, we feel, let's say, competent in contributing to a conversation around that. Other topics we may not be competent to
Okay.
kind of discuss. And by the way, it is fine for us to hold an employee workforce that has different views and opposing views. Actually, I think there's something beautiful
Yeah, I
about
agree.
any organization where you can have people with very different perspectives on certain things, and yet they're able to come and to work together towards a specific goal. I think for me,
Yeah.
that would be the
And be respectful.
definition of an effective team. Be respectful, accept there'll be different views. And of course, there are boundaries, right? So there are things that are illegal. Then it's a clear boundary,
Yeah.
and it's not something we'll accept or
Yeah,
tolerate.
the code of
But within those
code of
boundaries,
conduct.
yeah, within those boundaries, about being respectful and trying to keep people focused. But it's not an easy space, and these days I
Yeah.
realize it's harder and harder.
Yeah, and I guess there's no perfect solution. I suppose part of it is just like in your personal life, you're going to have debates, you're going to have arguments, and you should just expect that it'll happen inside of an organization and you deal with it when it comes up. But you can't create a bubble where you start, banning this and banning that. I think the code of conduct and being respectful is probably the most important thing. Maybe one more quick question about culture before we spend the rest of the
Mhm.
time on AI. Do you have kind of a culture dashboard? Like if you have to look at metrics to
Mhm.
see how well your culture is doing, and it sounds kind of broad, what are you looking at? Like, do you have a dashboard as the CHRO of something that you open up that says we're moving in the right direction? Obviously, engagement
Um,
is one score everyone looks at.
Yeah, I'd say I have a combination of things we look at, right? So we do track employee sentiment and engagement on a number of areas, right? So we look at how proud people feel of the organization, the level of trust they have in leadership. We look at things that have become more important for us. For example, how easy is it to get your job done, or how effective are we in making decisions? Those are things that are intrinsically linked to the bits we're trying to focus on our culture. One of the things that we talk about a lot in culture is customer centricity.
Mm,
How are we really focused on, kind of obsessing with everything we do has got to have a benefit for or customers. So we do track programs that we have in that space, for example, that are trying to move us forward. The other way to track it, for example, is part of our performance appraisal or performance review or management system looks at behaviors, not just what you do, but how you do it. So through the system, I can get a sense for hey, is there an area where we tend to be weaker in general? It's not about an
Mm,
individual, but there seems to be an area of needed development over here. So there are a number of things. I'd say I don't have, to be frank with you, one dashboard, but I do have four or five sources of information that we use to track how we're doing. And then the other bit is the organic way of doing it. And what I mean by that is that culture becomes a lot more powerful, the process of shaping culture, of nurturing culture, when it becomes second nature,
mm,
meaning that despite having metrics or having kind of a dashboard or whatever, it becomes a conversation we have in our meetings and we're talking about it. And when you and I are talking about it, we have common language and common distinctions that allow us to have a more productive conversation around it. So, for example, if I say one of the pillars of culture is behaviors or is the symbols we have in the organization, we may be having a conversation about a decision, and you may say, hey, Paulo, I think symbolically, this may not align with what we're trying to do. And
okay.
immediately, I and your colleagues will understand what you mean by that and say, you know, what's a good point. Maybe we need to think it differently. So we've been investing a lot of time in agreeing on what that language and those distinctions are. So it makes it easier to have productive, consequential conversations
Yeah.
about it.
All right. We have around 13, 14 minutes.
Yep.
So let's shift gears to AI a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
are you using agentic AI yet? And if so, can you share how you're using it, what you're using it for, any impact that it's had on your business?
Yeah, look, from an internal standpoint, nothing significant in that space. What we have is a whole lot of experimentation happening across the organization.
Okay.
We are looking at some of the most kind of basic use cases of generative AI. For example, in HR, for things like handling tickets and queries, right? That you used to need a bunch of people to go and to look at different systems and find things, etc. We're starting to kind of transition and experiment with moving some of those things to AI. And I think agentic
Mm,
will play a role there, in that rather than me having to focus on upgrading a bunch of systems so everything sits in the same system and is easy to navigate, with good agentic AI, I don't have to worry as much about that because it can go and fetch the information wherever it is. So there's a promise there, but it's not something that we're doing in depth. We're experimenting as we speak. Um, Productivity, like coders, like many other organizations, we have a lot of people using that, and we've had some great kind of success stories in either coding or reviewing coding or finding issues and that type of stuff. So that's creating more productivity and more room for our engineers to be to do more things and to kind of to accelerate some of the things that we're doing.
okay.
And then there's product stuff, right? That we have agents, like externally. We have a Penny for Priceline, and we have kind of a number of experiments we're running where people can interact with our products already using kind of LLM type of contextual search and all of that. So there's a lot going on from an HR standpoint. What we've really focused on is, it's a bit like a marketing campaign, was as things were kicking off, is getting the interest and the curiosity of people, then providing the tools and having agreements on some large platforms and making those tools available to everyone internally, and then incentivizing experimentation, right? And getting folks to try out different things across the business, because you never know where the kind of the interesting kind of ideas are going to come from. For example, one person in one of my teams, from kind of the side of their desk, they picked up a large amount of content. That we were talking about culture. He picked up a large amount of content and all the culture work we had been doing, threw it into one of the LLMs we work with, and created a chat bot that a manager can use
Huh.
to prepare for conversations or difficult conversations or team management. And it uses all the content of the culture work we've done for the last 3 years. And that was done quite frankly, without a massive amount of effort at a very low cost. That's one of many experiments that we think might become something larger for the org.
Where do you think this is all going to go? Like, if you had to imagine your company, I don't know, 5 years from now,
Hmm.
by that point we'll be on what, like ChatGPT 12, Grok,
Yeah.
10, who knows what it's going to be like. But you already see how good these tools are now. And you
Hmm.
mentioned you're kind of experimenting with it, which I think most organizations, by the way, are still very
Yes.
much in the experimentation phase.
Hmm.
I think the idea of like the agents freaks a lot of companies out, where you kind of fully turn something over to a
Yeah.
bot that is taking action on your behalf. But do
Hmm.
you imagine a time in like 5 years where functions or entire processes are being fully run by a agentic AI? So, for example, do you imagine 5 years from now, you go into one of your agents and you say, "Hey, do an engagement survey," and it'll automatically go out there, collect the data, analyze the data, come up with actions, follow up with leaders,
Hmm.
check in with them, schedule meet. Like, are we going to get to a point where you can give that kind of a command and just have it run with it? Is that the idea, or too far fetched?
No, no, I've already seen some prototypes that do parts of what you've just described.
Really?
Right. There are already agents out there that you can say, I want a survey, I want it to be about this and that. And I want you to check with these five stakeholders on their feedback. So run this mini survey to get their feedback before we run the main thing, and then create the email that we're going to send to employees once the information comes back. Do a nudge in 7 days to make sure we get a higher response rate. So there are things like that that already exist. They might not be kind of fully baked yet, but they're
Like
there.
inside your company, you're doing it, or you mean like vendors that
Uh,
are
I've seen vendors doing
vendors?
that. We're not
Okay.
doing that we're using AI to facilitate some of the process. So there are things that many of my team members would take days doing,
Yeah.
and now they do it in hours or minutes, and that's great. I think we're going to see more of that. It's hard to predict, Jacob, because with exponential, we all know we always kind of underestimate. We all overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term, isn't it? So, 5 years, is it long term, short term? I don't know. But I think we're going to be able to do a lot more than we can do today. We're going to be able to handle many of those processes through agents. Will we be able to trust it fully to agents? I'm not sure. I suspect it's going to be a hybrid of agents working with humans, and then humans becoming more of a supervisory quality assurance, checks and balances, or creative element to that. Um, and and then I think, at least it's been my experience with technology, that technology enables you to do a lot more, but enables you to have higher ambition as well, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's the mix of technology with higher ambition so far has generated this dynamic where technology supposedly has created more jobs than it's destroyed. So I look into the future. I have a question mark, right? Is this technology now in generative AI something similar to prior technologies, and we will see that same dynamic, or is it fundamentally different, right? And this time it might not have the same dynamic. And depends which day you ask me if I'm optimistic or not. I might say either, look, it is different, but it will enable so much more ambition and creativity that there will be a lot of new jobs and new things coming up that we can't really envision from where we are today, right? And that's me on an optimistic day. On a not so optimistic day, I'd say, look, that might be true, but there will be a transition period that will be very hard, because you might create new jobs and new opportunities, but you won't have yet the people who have the skills and the abilities to do that, and you have people who have skills and abilities that are no longer as needed, and then you might have a real breaking point, which will be tough.
Yeah, I think the next few years will certainly be quite interesting when we think about the impact that AI is going to have. I tend to be a little bit more on the optimist side. Um, because even in the past when we've seen the impact of technology, we've always unleashed creativity and have put new jobs in place.
Mhm.
There are some people who are predicting millions of people going out of work, a shift to a 3-day work week, mass chaos out there. But I don't know. I tend to be more of an optimist in this area. I mean, even right now, I use a lot of AI in the work that I'm doing, but I still have a video editor. I still have somebody who helps me with graphic design and visuals, just because I find that the AI tools are not what's the right word? They're not there yet, in my opinion, especially on the creative side for
Mhm.
ideation, for images. Like it's just not. You don't get the. There's something valuable about having a human look at something because I feel like they do a better job of connecting with content and pulling out content and identifying what would resonate better maybe with people.
Right.
Whereas AI is still maybe not there, but 3, 4, 5 years, who knows what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So it sounds like you're still somewhere in the middle. You're not on the optimist side yet, or you're not on the pessimist side. You're still kind of floating in the middle.
I'm in the good old cautiously optimistic, and the cautious part of it can be turned into action. Because, some people say, right, that the challenge with optimism is that it may not be something that drives you to action.
Yeah,
Overly pessimistic views also might throw it into paralysis because, well, whatever, there's nothing I can do. On the cautiously optimistic, maybe, or the hopeful optimistic, is the sense of, look, there are scenarios in the future which I think can be very compelling in many ways, but there's work we got to do between now and then to ensure that that scenario is the one that manifests for us, and that goes into a combination of multiple things. From a company standpoint, for me, it's about experimentation and opportunities for people to learn and to upskill and to reskill. So you have a workforce that is more flexible and is able to engage with a number of different ways in which you can, grow and develop the organization. And that is open to embracing, technology
yeah.
and new ways of working. So.
But it sounds like you're already in the process of using some AI. I like the idea of experimentation, and I think that's probably the right approach for a lot of organizations. Do you see AI and culture crossing streams at all? Like, will AI impact culture? Will culture impact AI, or do you see them as kind of two separate paths?
I mean, culture is intrinsic to absolutely anything you do in the organization. So invariably, even the way you engage with AI will be influenced by the culture of your organization, right? For us, we have a very old experimentation, A/B testing type of culture that I'd say can play both ways. One side of it, the curiosity and the experimentation invites people to engage with AI, to try new things, etc. But the A/B testing, which is very much based on evidence, right? You run experiments and then you see which one gives you the evidence that is going to change what you do. I'd argue in this beginning of the journey of generative AI for all of us, we don't have a lot of evidence on a lot of stuff yet. And that's not a reason to kill the experiment and not to try. So I think the process of experimentation for us in general is not just about experimenting what works, it's about getting acquainted with this technology. And I think it will be just like it
Yeah.
happened with other technologies with the internet, right? Remember the beginnings of the internet? People were picking up what they did and putting it online. Oh, this is amazing. We'll put the yellow pages online. That's great. But fast forward 10 and 20 years, we're doing things that were unthinkable back then. And I'm sure we're going to have the same going forward. But the way to get there is to get people to really make it second nature as well, the playing with these new technologies. And for
Yeah.
that, you got to have some openness that the investment is not going to have a very clear ROI right away.
I love it. I think it's a great way to wrap up. Paulo, where can people go to learn more about you, about Booking Holdings? I don't know if you guys are hiring right now and maybe want to plug your career page. Anything you want to mention for people to check out? I know you're on
Now,
LinkedIn as well.
thanks for that. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not a huge poster or not very active there, to be sincere. But we do have, bookingholdings.com. You can see all of our brands there. We're always looking for amazing talent everywhere around the world. All of our job posts are there. So yeah, check us out and check our products. I mean, I was a user of a number of our products way before I joined the organization. And yeah, I'm suspect, but I was a fan already way before.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I will see all of you next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.